everyone. Welcome to Archives Live. I'm Bonnie Kane-Wood, the Manager of Communication Services for the OSU Libraries. And with me, as always, is the head of the archives, Mr. David Peters. David, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Bonnie.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us. For our regular viewers, I'm a new face to the Archives Live. Our regular host, Krishayla Smith, served as our archives social media intern for 2 years, and she was integral to the launch of our Archives Live series. Krishayla recently graduated from OSU with her bachelor's degree in strategic communications, and she has moved on to continue her career in the field. So we will, of course, miss Krishayla very much, but we wish her the best of luck in her new adventures.
Loved working with Shayla, and she got us through our rookie season, so it was a wonderful adventure.
Wonderful. Well, this month we are once again taking the Archives Live on the road. Last month we were over at the Spears School of Business, and today we are in the lovely council room of the Student Union. And this building is exactly what we are talking about today. We are going to discuss the history of the Student Union. So if any of our viewers have a question for David about the union, please type those into the comments and we will do our best to answer those during our program this afternoon. And if you have any fond memories of the union or little stories you'd like to share, we would love to see those as well. Please just add them to our comments. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Now, David, today I think it's easy to imagine that the union was always here, but we know that's not the case. When did we actually break ground on the student union, and how long was it before it was open to our students?
So they broke ground in the summer of 1948, and so it's after the war. GIs have begun returning and their families. So summer of 1948, the first activity, the first official opening activity was September 9th, 1950. So it took them a little over 2 years to complete the initial construction of the Student Union building.
Wow. Now, okay, so 1950, there's a lot of OSU history prior to that. So what did students do? Where was the home of all of our student activities before we had a union?
So before 1910, there's no even residence halls on campus, and so students just come here for class mostly. There are very few locations for them to gather and socialize. Most of those were off campus. But beginning in the teens, the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, used a room in the basement of what was Williams Hall. It was that castle-looking building in the southwest part of corner of campus. So they used a facility down there to open up a YMCA. That is served as kind of the social gathering point, especially during the early 20s, until they completed a building called the Y Hut, the YMCA Hut. And the YMCA moved their social activities and their rooms and stuff to this little wood frame building, which is right across from where we are now. It's just north of where the Student Union is. It's roughly where the classroom building is now. Okay. We've got a picture of it here if people would like to look at it. But here's a picture of the Y Hut. It was a very small little building, and it had a small cafeteria in there. You could get coffee and donuts, or you could get sandwiches at lunchtime. And then they also had small offices and then social rooms. Here's a picture of the Y Hut. So that's located where the classroom building is now. The old power plant was located just to the west of it. But it was a very small, nondescript building. For a number of years, a couple, the Jacksons, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Jackson, they were both blind, but they ran the coffee shop and they made sandwiches. And that was the gathering point. So it was very close to where we are now, just as another little facility.
Is that larger building we see in the background, is that Whitehurst?
That building in the middle of is Life Sciences East. And then you can just see the edges of engineering. It would be engineering south on the right-hand side. So that's the corner where the Y Hut was located. Oh, here's the Jacksons, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Jackson, and their seeing eye dog. It was just a small little cafeteria. They ran that. There was also a cafeteria north of where the library is now that was used for a number of years, not only as a cafeteria but as a social gathering point. And that building didn't last very long. It was kind of temporarily thrown up to serve, especially if the student enrollment increased after World War II.
Look at those cars. What year do you think this photo is from?
I'm guessing about 1946, 45, 46, sometime in there. And by the time they build the library, then this building is torn down. And then now we're to plans for this existing building. So.
Great. So the student union has always been in this location, but in 1950, the area around it probably would have looked a little bit different. What else was here in 1950 when the building opened?
So when the building opens, the classroom building is still under construction. It's almost completed. The library is just beginning construction, and so it's just started. Where the old business building is now, but there was a former engineering building at that location. And then Gunderson was where it is now. Most of the things immediately around haven't changed too a lot. Whitehurst Hall, Theta Pond, all that has remained the same. But now we've added, of course, the Alumni Association building. But this immediate area, classroom is under construction. That old civil engineering building is still being used before they build the business building, which is another 15, 20 years later. And then most of the area north of us, Hanner Hall was located just to the north and east of us. So it was really kind of the new center of campus. As the center of campus was moving from Old Central eventually to the library, this kind of became a temporary center as it was moving to the north and west.
Great. For our viewers, if you're just now joining us, so I am here with David Peters, and we are talking about the OSU Student Union. We would love for you to join the conversation by posting your questions in our comment section. And maybe if you have a student union story you would like to share, we would love to see you post that in the comments as well. So David, let's double back to the construction for just a minute. How was that original construction of the student union funded?
So they begun proposing a union as early as in the 1920s. President Bradford Knapp had proposed a union. Bennett, when he first gets here in 1928 as a part of his 25-year plan, proposes a student union. But of course we had the Depression. And so funding was a critical issue for them, and they were having trouble getting state support for what was considered a social gathering point for students. And so eventually they're able to get some bonds, revenue bonds raised for the construction of the facility.
Great.
And that didn't happen until the mid-40s, after World War II.
Okay.
So about 46, 47, I think they finally get the bonds approved for construction.
So if they had bonds, what revenue streams did they intend to use for repayment of those?
So they initiated, and student approved of this, a student fee. And so student fees were going to cover roughly half of the annual payment for the bond. They also anticipated the hotel would raise funding. They also anticipated increased food services that they would provide, and the bookstore. They had revenue streams from the bookstore before. I mean, they knew how much the bookstore was bringing in, and then they worked with several other universities that had similar kinds of structures on their campuses to determine what the hotel would bring in and what the food services area would bring in. And so combined with that with some retail shops that went in, and other areas like the pool area, the billiard area, and the bowling alley downstairs, they had a series of revenue streams that then they could merge all together then to make the payments on the bonds.
Great. So that's actually a nice transition for one of our audience questions. William wants to know, what happened to that bowling alley?
Well, so the bowling alley was quite popular for a number of years, but then its popularity began to decline into the 80s and 90s. And so I know with this latest construction, it was removed, but actually had been removed before that. It just wasn't as popular. And so, and there was more competition for social activities too by the 1990s and early 2000. But you have to remember, initially, students had begun living on campus, and so there weren't a lot of other options for them. And in a number of years, students couldn't have vehicles either. They couldn't have cars. And so they had to be within walking distance. And so things like the bowling alley and the billiard hall, pinball machines, social things like that were all very popular, especially in the 50s and 60s.
Sure. Anthony asks, was there a street in front of the union? So we kind of talked about what used to be here. Have the roads changed as well?
So Washington Street ran straight through campus. So if you just imagine going straight through campus, hitting the library and keep going. So initially when the Union was completed or under construction, Washington Street was still open.
And Washington Street is that bit that we affectionately call the Strip, right?
The Strip,
yes.
right. So the Strip heading north, and that ran right in front of the Union. That would be on the west side of the Union. With the construction of the library, which they started construction late 40s, early 50s, as soon as they finished construction of this building, they closed Washington Street. They used it for a while as really kind of a conduit to get materials to the library and to the building, but it was no longer used for public use after this library was completed in 1950. But that's where Washington Street, so between where the Union and the Formal Gardens are now, was where Washington Street ran.
So when were the Formal Gardens put in?
Well, those were actually started long before the Union was ever put in. So they were there, they existed before the Union came in. And they had to reconfigure them a little bit, but if you look at images of the Formal Gardens before the Union and after Union, they transferred that same dynamic to any adjustments they made. The Formal Gardens have been there for quite a while.
Great. So for our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. If you're just tuning in, we are here with David Peters, head of the OSU Archives. We are here in the Student Union, and we are talking about the history and role of its here on campus. And you can help us keep the conversation going by placing your questions or your memories about the Union in our comments section, and we'll do our best to share those during the program. Okay.
Can I share a few more pictures with you, Bonnie?
Yes, let's take a look.
Okay.
Yeah, great time.
So here we have an initial drawing, a plan for the Union. I don't know if you, for those people can tell, but it was the old chemistry building. It's now the Paul Miller building is on the left-hand side, and the hotel then was wrapped kind of around it. And so this is how they initially had planned to expand the Union and its growth. But this was an initial plan. It didn't happen quite this way, but you can see the area to the east. To the north and east wasn't developed initially, and the Starlight Terrace area on the east side is open, and we'll see more pictures of that. Here's early construction. They dug down quite a bit. It kind of looks in this picture like the science and engineering building or the engineering building. I'm sorry, the chemistry building is up on those pillars, but it's not. It's just the first floors of the Union. There were jokes about how deep the hole was for the Union. This was in the Daily Collegian early on. They're talking about how close they apparently were to the devil and hell. Here's the basement floor area of the Union. The bowling alley you can see is it would be the northwest corner. I think that's right. There's a billiard room, offices, and meeting areas. Here's the second floor with the ballroom, which is two floors in height. That's up on the second floor. There was a modern lounge on one side. There was a Chinese lounge on the other side. I think they refer to that now as the French lounge. And then the hotel takes up most of the area to the right, hotel rooms. And here as they're getting close, they've got major construction. You can see Washington Street right there in front. We've got a few cars still along there. So it's really kind of closed for through traffic, but there is traffic that traveled from, there used to be a road that ran from Whitehurst right to the north of the Union. Here they are getting close to completion. Just an aerial photo of the Union. Here's the east side, and you can't see this side anymore, but up on the fourth floor is the Starlight Terrace, and then this was the east entrance, and on the second level would be the entrance into the ballroom. So that's how you could enter into the ballroom from that side. Here's what it looked like when it was completed. This has all now been covered up with other building that has gone on since then. But this is the balcony area outside of the ballroom, and then above was the Starlight Terrace. Here's just another view showing that area, entrance into the ballroom and the terrace. Here's you can see the tower. Here's a picture of the Starlight Terrace, what it looked like before they enclosed it. And so it literally was an open area, open to the starlight.
The name makes so much more sense when you know that.
Now that you see it, that's Morrill Hall in the background and Gunnarsson in the background. But it was a very open, very pleasant area, and people enjoyed sitting out there in the evenings. It was on the east side of the building, and so they were out of direct sunlight in the afternoons and evenings, and so it was a very lovely place. There would be dances there as well. Here was the bowling alley that was located in the basement. There were 8 lanes of bowling. And then they were also very proud of their kitchen facilities. So they dramatically expanded their food preparation services. And so they had a large kitchen areas to support food services. Here's a drawing how they intended the ballroom to look when it was completed. And so you notice they had the open windows and doors on the east side. I'm sure it was a beautiful location. Here it is packed with folks. I think they could serve, it was over 600, maybe 700 people, and they would just have rows of tables lined up. And then they had a head table at the front where there was a stage. This happens to be a class reunions. A series of class reunions came back, and they used the ballroom then as a location for that. Here's the ballroom. When it was empty, preparing for a dance. They could have up to 1,500 people there, so 750 couples. They anticipated having room for that for dances. And here's 2, just 2. But there were the doors leading out, doors and windows leading out to the east side of the Union. And here's the second floor. As you go up those stairs on the east side, this is the area right in front of the ballroom, and that's all now been enclosed. So a few of the spaces have changed considerably since it was first constructed. This is one of the eating areas on the first floor. They planned on being able to serve and feed roughly 450 to 500 people at a time during the lunch crowds and those kinds of things. Normally they weren't packed in quite this tightly, but they had an ability to serve quite a few at several different locations within the Union. Here's that area on the first floor. You may recognize some of the pillars that are still existing now, but this is how they had the area set up on the first floor for various dining services when the building first opened. And this was one of the dining room areas. And at one point they had a Big 8 room where they had the symbols from the different colleges that were in the Big 8. I think this probably is the Colorado Buffaloes that they're sitting in front of. So anyway, I don't know if you want me to keep showing some pictures or not, but here is, initially they had some very formal lounges, the French lounge, the Chinese lounge, there was a modern lounge, eventually there was the Georgian lounge, but they were all very formal, much like a formal dining or living room that people would have been comfortable in. And so these are several of the different lounges that were located in a variety of locations in the building. And they provided, quiet, kind of a home setting, I think, for students to help them feel like they were at home. Very, very lovely spaces. And then there were more informal places. There were just in-between areas where students could relax and sit. They even had a browsing room in the Union. We have a browsing room, of course, in the library now, but they had a browsing room in the Union when it first went up. A variety of different spaces for students to gather, to eat, to meet.
Great. Looks like we have a couple questions coming in
great.
from our audience, so let's go ahead and ask a few of those. Tom wants to know, is there truth to the rumor Bennett wanted US 51 to run through campus?
Well, initially, when they first started planning both this facility and the library, and this was in the late 20s, early 30s, enrollments were only about 2,500 to 3,000 students. And so what they had envisioned was something like Lincoln Boulevard in Oklahoma City that goes down and then around the Capitol and then continues on. So initially they had envisioned that 177 would go through, not 51, but 177 would go up Washington Street. And so it would go past what would become the Union, around the library, and then continue on. So it was 177 and not 51 that they had envisioned going through. But of course, by the time the building is completed and the Union, enrollments had increased to, I think, close to 10 or 12,000. Well, that would have been just a logistic nightmare between classes. Can you imagine a major state highway towards traffic? And it was just impossible. But initially, yes, they had planned for State Highway 177 to go run through campus, and it would have turned right off of 51, which is on 6th Street. So from 51, you would have gone on 177 north through Washington Street and through campus and then on north. Thanks, Tom.
Linda asks, when was the theater built in the Student Union?
So that came in that next edition. So the initial construction was completed in the 1950s, and then by the early to mid 60s, they begun plans for the addition to the east. It was on the south side, and that's when the theater was added. I think the theater holds about 450, but they reconfigured some of the office areas and some of the lounges, and that's when they developed the theater area. And I think it has a lounge near it also, and also reconfigured some of the other activities that were located in campus in the Union. Those have changed over time too. So.
Samantha asks, what are our hosts' favorite memories of their time at the Oklahoma State University Student Union? So, David, what is your favorite memory of the Union?
So it's my first memory really of the Union, and when I was a senior in high school, we had our high school dance up in the Starlight Terrace, and that was also happened to be the first date I had with my girlfriend. We were boyfriend and girlfriend then, but it was our first date. And she's now my wife. And so that's my favorite memory of the Union. It was my first time here. I'd never been in Starlight Terrace before. And so that's still kind of a special location for me.
And how long have you and your lovely wife, Sarah, been married?
We've been married for 35 years and we've known each other for over 40 years. So.
Well, I feel like my favorite student union memory is very similar. My husband and I actually got married in the Atherton Hotel here at Student Union. So that would have to be my favorite student union memory.
Good. I also used to go bowling in the bowling alley.
Did you?
I was on a bowling team, and that was also fun. And then I enjoyed the stateroom is now the Ranchers Club, but I enjoyed brunch. Sunday brunches in the stateroom was always a special treat. So,
Juliana asks, did Frank Eaton shoot his gun in the French Lounge?
It wasn't in the French Lounge. I think it was either the basement or the first floor. Frank had come to campus. B.B. Chapman was a history faculty member here, and he would invite Frank to come and talk about kind of his experiences at Oklahoma history. He retired in the Oklahoma history class. And Frank traveled with a loaded revolver, and Frank was known for his quick draw. Of course, Frank is in his late 80s, early 90s by this point in time, and apparently while attempting a quick draw, it was in some room of the basement, or I think it was the basement, but and it was in a hallway, I believe. But he drew quickly and fired, and the bullet did lodge in the floorboard, the trim around the floor. There were attempts to some people wanted to put like a marker there, but the student union director at the time felt that was probably inappropriate. They covered up the hole, and they pulled the bullet out, covered up the hole, and just pretended it didn't happen. And it was a security issue, and I don't think Frank ever, that was the only incident I know of.
All right. If you are just now joining us, we are with David Peters, head of the archives. We are talking about the history and role of the OSU Student Union here on campus, and we would love it if you would post your questions, or if you have any memories or quick stories you'd like to share, we'd love to see those in our comments.
Can I show you a few pictures of the hotel real quick?
Let's
Just
look
real
at the
quick.
hotel, yeah.
So this was the lobby area outside the hotel. So let me skip ahead here. So also there have been other offices located in the Union. And so the former Student Association, which now we know as the Alumni Association, was housed in the Union for a number of years. They had their placement bureau or career services now, but they had a placement service that the alumni ran, and they still have those offices where people can interview, so that it's managed differently now. Here's the desk, registration desk at the hotel when it was first came in. It was called the Union Club to distinguish it from the Union. They referred to the hotel as the Union Club. And here's one of the extravagant rooms that was available for you. And then there were also an upscale room that was
the suites are much nicer now.
And so they have been renovated since then. But at this point in time, in the early 1950s, these were fairly nice rooms for people, and they really met a need for people visiting on campus, not just during athletic seasons, but for visitors coming to campus. And so the Union's always been popular. And here it's referred to as the Union Club. This was the sign outside knowing you were there.
Another question we have from our Facebook audience, Samantha wants to know, has the Atherton Hotel always been a part of the Union? Was it
Yes.
part of the original plan?
Yes, initially it was called the Union Club,
Mhm.
but yes, the Atherton, that section has always been a part of the Union. They felt it was critical both for the revenue stream that involved, also for the need that they felt was on campus. And they also tied in also with the hospitality academic areas, and so they integrated a lot of those things with the hotel. So that's always been a significant part of the Union. And it's been there, like I said, several renovations, but it's always been a part of it. One additional addition to the, I guess, building in a way was the student union parking garage, and that came in the late 60s, early 70s, but also a way to provide additional parking on that side of campus. So I forgot about that addition.
Well, speaking of additions, if you've been to campus over the last few years, like David and I have, or if you've just come back and visited our campus, then you know that the Union recently underwent a transformational renovation, but that hasn't been its only major change. Can you tell us a little bit about how the building has grown? What kind of eras of additions have we had over the years?
So I'll kind of summarize this. So you have the original construction completed in the summer, fall of 1950.
Mm-hmm.
You have the wing that was added in the mid-60s that includes the area where the Little Theater is now. So
Yes.
it connects the Little Theater to the initial main wing. Then you had the parking garage that came in a little bit later. And then, of course, now we have the area where the registrar and the bursar, but a lot of the student services were pooled together in that wing that sits between the Union and the journalism and broadcasting, that area. That at one time had been kind of a sunken garden area. But that area then was repurposed, and that building addition was added to it. And it has that large atrium in the center. So those are the main enhancements to the building over time. And each time, of course, they do that, offices shift and functions shift. But it still maintains itself as a center for student activities, student organizations, meeting rooms, meeting areas, food services. It still provides a lot of the things that had initially been planned for, even as it's modified. It's both interior and exterior throughout the years.
Okay, we have another question that's kind of renovation focused, and hopefully we're not going to stump the archivist on this one. Matthew wants to know, was the Student Union Tower that's being renovated now always part of the Union, and what is it made out of?
So it's always been a part of the construction. It was part of that first section that was completed in 1950. I think the top was copper.
Okay.
But I'm not positive. I'll have to check on that. I know they're renovating it now. And someplace I've come across the gentleman who was part of building that tower. I can't remember his name, but we have either his story or an oral history or something. I've seen something about his affiliation with that tower, and I think it was copper. And I'm not sure what they're planning with. Maybe they're going back with copper, and it may be copper that had the patina.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, we might have to do a little more research
A little
on
more
that
research
and
on that one.
post an update in the comments a little bit later.
We will find out.
People want to know. Okay, so you've talked about how the physical building has changed. How has the building's functions evolved?
So things like the bowling alley is gone, and so you don't have those kinds of gaming activities. But the Little Theater is now still used for speakers, for movies. They'll have events in the theater. The ballroom still gets used for not only dining and dancing, but there are groups that meet there for presentations. There are exhibits that take place in that area. The hotel, still is used for guests on campus. I mentioned, the alumni have now moved out, and the foundation's moved out, so those offices have been reconfigured for other purposes. And I think with this latest renovation, they tried to return student utilization as a top priority. So it's a center for a lot of social activities on campus, not just students, but they wanted to make sure that students had an integral part in both the expansion of the building. With this bump out that we're in right now, was a part of this latest expansion to the north. But it still serves as a home for offices for organizations and activities all across campus, and a meeting place for people on campus.
Great. Let's see. We've got this question. John wants to know, can you view from the top of the tower?
Not that I'm aware of. We'd have to check on that. I kind of doubt it, but we'll check with the student union staff. I doubt you can
Get up there.
get up to the tower.
Well, I do have one last question. Were there any photographs you wanted to show us before we
let's see.
wrapped up?
So here are a few of the council rooms, kind of formal meeting rooms, how they originally looked. And so they were quite ornate initially. And then here's one of the shops. This is, I think, from the 70s, but there was Cecil's was kind of a drugstore and pharmacy with greeting cards and other kinds of paraphernalia, but that was downstairs. There was a clothing store. Mr. G's was downstairs on the first floor. So there used to be a number of shops, small shops, jewelry stores. Oh, here's that sunken garden area where the student center is now for the registrar, bursar, those activities. But that area was a nice gathering point on the east side of the building outside. Kind of similar to what they have now on the north side with the plaza as a gathering point for students. Here's that same east-west hallway outside that runs kind of parallel to where Washington Street used to run. Here are the formal gardens soon after the building was completed, so you can see they're very similar to how they are now. The formal gardens used to expand to the south a little bit further. And then we have just a few buildings of pictures of what it looked like soon after construction was completed. So I think that's most of our pictures.
That's a wonderful photo to end on. Okay, so like I said, we have one last question from our Facebook audience. I've kind of been saving this one because I thought it was a nice one to end on. John asks, is the student union still the largest and most comprehensive student union in the country?
So it probably depends upon how you would measure it, whether it's floor footage or cubic footage. I think it would be very difficult for anyone to contest us on that, but we are one of the most significant unions anywhere in the United States. We, I think, provide a number of different services and have for over almost 70 years now for our students at the center part of campus. And so I think we are, if not the biggest, one of the biggest, and proud of, I think, of the service that the union provides to our students, faculty, and staff, and the community that Stillwater. So I don't know for sure, but I think the union director would ask that anyone prove that they have something bigger, and no one has yet proved that they have a larger facility.
Well, then let's go with it.
Okay, so
Okay, we're going to go
we'll hold
with
on
that.
to that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. It has been great chatting with you today. Thank you to all of our viewers for joining us. I do hope that you will like and share this post. Don't forget to check out all of the archives videos on our OState TV and YouTube channels. And we will see you next time on Archives Live when we are going to give a whole new meaning to taking the show on the road. Thank you. Bye-bye.